Hey there, Demon Slayers. Grab your swords and lock and load because today we're diving deep into the dark and stylish world of Devil May Cry. Ever since its beginnings, Hideki Kamiya was a key part of the Resident Evil series, acting as a planner and director within various games. But when his vision for a new Resident Evil title didn't quite fit Capcom's vision of a Resident Evil universe, he wasn't asked to change his game. Rather, he was asked to turn it into something completely new. That project, a mix of gothic horror, fast paced combat, and a protagonist who oozes cool from every pore, became Devil May Cry and set a new standard for the action genre. Today, we're going to dive into the creation of Devil May Cry and revisit the career of its creator, Hideki Kamiya. So if you're ready to slice, shoot, and style your way through hordes of demons, stick around as we learn all about this action-adventure staple on today's trip down memory card lane. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. I hope these words find you well. Hello and welcome to the 208th episode of our video game history podcast, A Trip Down Memory Card Lane. Each week, we'll tell you a story relevant to the current week in gaming history. It can be about a game or the people that have created it. It can be about a console or the technology that brought it to life. We often talk about the companies that bring it all together, making our hobby, video games, a reality. While telling you each story, we hope to teach you something new about the topic, what it took from the world as its inspiration, or what it gave back to the world in its legacy. Today, we're diving into the world of Devil May Cry, the stylish action game that redefined its genre when it was first released on August 23rd, 2001. I'm David Casson, and as always, I'm joined by my co-host, who, like Dante, never seems to run out of cool one-liners. He's my brother, Rob Casson. Rob, if you had to name your signature move, what would it be?
I would have to say, Dave, that it would be bleak rat flowing trash.
Bleak rat blowing trash.
No, flowing trash.
Oh, flowing trash. Bleak rat flowing trash.
Yes.
Huh. Interesting.
And yours?
Meek, not bleak. Meek. I don't know. Disapproving daddy. I don't know. What
Are you
would my
sure it wouldn't be something more like meek cat, snowing crane?
meek cat bowing crane? I guess I don't know.
Hey, there you go. Meek cat, bowing crane.
Decrepit old dude flowing nun.
Hmm.
You are a Devil May Cry fan
I've dabbled once or twice.
once or twice.
Yeah, you know. I
Just
played
one.
the game
You
once or
played
twice.
the game.
Yeah, the game. The
The
original.
game. Yeah, the original.
Yeah, that's all we're talking about. Just the original.
Eh,
There weren't any sequels or anything, especially not
no,
one that's shall not be named, even though we did an episode on it.
we did. We did that one before we did this one.
Yeah, we won't talk about that.
Yeah,
Much
well,
like the game, that episode doesn't exist.
is that what you is? So, how do you account for the time I spent playing it?
You were delusional.
I was probably delusional. You are absolutely correct. I was having a psychotic break. Thought I was living in another dimension, and we don't speak about the things I saw while I was in said dimension.
You're absolutely right there, Dave.
Okay, good. Well,
Otherwise, you would face the screaming barrage of true spear.
so before we get into the history of Devil May Cry, which we really didn't cover in our last episode, why don't you tell our listeners about some other things that have happened during this week in gaming history?
Certainly, Dave. Kicking it off on August 23rd, 1993, Nintendo and Silicon Graphics Inc., also known as SGI, announced a joint venture that would eventually lead to the creation of none other than the Nintendo 64. This collaboration aimed to leverage SGI's cutting edge 3D graphics technology to develop a revolutionary gaming console. The partnership combined Nintendo's expertise in game design and development with SGI's advanced graphics capabilities, promising to deliver unprecedented levels of graphical performance and gameplay experience. The N64, released in 1996, featured innovative elements such as 64-bit processor, advanced 3D graphics, and an analog joystick, setting new standards in the gaming industry. This joint venture was instrumental in shaping the future of video games, cementing the N64's legacy as one of the most influential gaming consoles of its time.
Which we still have to do an episode on. We did an episode on the 64DD, the disk drive add on for it. But if I'm not mistaken, we have yet to do an episode on the 64 itself, huh?
You're absolutely right there, Dave.
Absolutely right there. Got to add that to a future schedule. Yes, sir.
Indeed.
Yes, sirree. All right.
Keeping up with the theme of the N64, on August 23rd, 1997, Rare and Nintendo released GoldenEye 007, a first person shooter based on the James Bond film of the same name. GoldenEye 007 revolutionized the genre with its engaging single player campaign, where players assume the role of James Bond to thwart a nuclear weapons scheme, and its highly acclaimed split screen multiplayer mode, which allowed up to 4 players to compete in various deathmatch scenarios. The game was praised for its innovative gameplay mechanics, including realistic environments, varied mission objectives, and a groundbreaking aiming system. GoldenEye 007 received widespread critical acclaim and commercial success, becoming one of the best selling games for the Nintendo 64 and setting new standards for future first person shooters. Its impact on the genre and multiplayer gaming remains significant, cementing its legacy as a classic in video game history. And if you want to learn more about GoldenEye, we did it back in episode 52, so go give that a listen.
It was our 1 year episode. We did a golden eye for a golden episode.
Well, you want to know something crazier, Dave?
Hmm.
That was 1 year. Today marks 4.
Does it really? Oh
208.
crap! It does. I
Ba-ba-da-ba-ba-da-ba. Woo!
didn't even realize it. Well, I guess after that first one or two, it's
Another year in
just
the life.
yeah, just riding a bike, huh?
Certainly is, Dave.
Huh. Well then, I feel silly for not even remembering. Congratulations.
Well, that's what I'm here for. But hey, what better way to celebrate year 4 than with a game that, well, is one of my big pushes into video gaming.
True statement.
Next up, for This Week in Gaming History, on August 24th, 2004, Atari released Test Drive Eve of Destruction for the PS2 and Xbox. Developed by Monster Games, this racing game diverged from traditional racing titles by focusing on demolition derby style events and vehicular combat. Players could participate in a variety of destructive racing modes, including figure eight races, trailer races, and school bus races, among others. The game was praised for its diverse gameplay modes, chaotic action, and the thrill of vehicular destruction. Test Drive Eve of Destruction provided a refreshing take on the racing genre, offering players an adrenaline fueled experience that emphasized fun and mayhem over conventional racing. Despite not achieving massive commercial success, it garnered a cult following and remains a fondly remembered entry in the Test Drive series.
One that I still have my physical copy of.
I can't say I'm surprised about that.
But dude, figure eight races, trailer races, school bus races. I mean, like, it had so much weird stuff that you can't find anywhere else. I mean, the trailer races alone is weird, you know. Um, it had things like the race car bowling we used to see at the destruction. It was literally like all the fun destruction derby events that you see once in a blue moon on the dirt tracks. It was all of that in a video game, and it was so much fun.
Oh, absolutely. I never owned a copy of it. I just rented it from the video store. And, for those that are too young to remember that, that's where you could go and rent physical copies of movies and games.
Wow.
But I rented it from there and just never bought it. But you're right, it was a fantastic game, and you're right, it did remind me of all those times going out to those actual events at the local racetrack. So a lot of fun, a lot of cool stuff, and I agree, it was a fantastic entry into the test drive series.
True statement.
On August 24th, 2006, Rune Factory: A Fantasy Harvest Moon was released for the Nintendo DS in Japan. Developed by Neverland Co. and published by Marvelous Interactive, this game is a spin off of the popular Harvest Moon series, blending traditional farming simulation elements with action RPG gameplay. In Rune Factory, players take on the role of Raguna, a young amnesiac who must cultivate crops, raise livestock, and battle monsters to uncover the mysteries of his past and the world around him. The game introduced dungeon exploration and combat mechanics, adding a new layer of depth to the familiar farming and life simulation activities. Rune Factory was praised for its innovative combination of genres, charming characters, and engaging gameplay, leading to the creation of several sequels and establishing a successful franchise in its own right.
And probably inspiring more modern games in that genre like Stardew Valley, because it contains all those things too.
Yeah, sure
Yeah.
does. Actually didn't know about that. The
What
the
that
action part. I knew it was
that's
farming, but I didn't know about the fighting stuff.
that Stardew? Yeah, Stardew has a whole like mines that you have to go into to get materials, and you fight enemies in the mines.
Hmm. Neat. Pretty neat. Pretty neat indeed. All right. Last up for this week in gaming history on August 24th, 2000. Oh, sorry. Last up for this week in gaming history on August 21st, 2007, 2K Games released Bioshock, developed by Irrational Games, which was then known as 2K Boston. Set in the underwater city of Rapture, Bioshock combines first person shooter mechanics with rich storytelling and atmospheric horror. Players take on the role of Jack, a plane crash survivor who discovers Rapture and uncovers its dark secrets, including genetic modifications known as plasmids, which grant superhuman abilities. The game was lauded for its deep narrative, inspired by philosophical and ethical questions, and its immersive environment, designed with Art Deco aesthetics. Bioshock received widespread critical acclaim for its innovative gameplay, compelling story, and stunning visuals, becoming a landmark title in the gaming industry and spawning sequels and a dedicated fan base. And we learned about it back in episode 156 alongside the career of Ken Levine, so go check it out if you want to learn more.
And we learned about the beginnings of Irrational Games last week in our System Shock episode,
Ooh, good
which
call.
was Bioshock is the spiritual successor to System Shock. And fun little fact about that, because we talked about Irrational Games last week. The studio was formed as Irrational Games, and then 2K bought it and renamed it 2K Boston, and then later on, they changed their name back to Irrational Games. There was literally a period of like 3-4 years when they were 2K Boston, and that just so happens to be the period when they made Bioshock. So technically, Bioshock is a 2K Boston game.
Right, you are, Dave.
Yep.
And that's more history. And if you want to learn more about that all, go back to last week's episode, so 156 and then 207, and you'll learn all about System Shock and Bioshock.
System Shock and Bioshock indeed. But we are not here for either or, are we?
No, we are not, Dave. So if you don't mind, would you kindly get
Oh
on with today's topic?
no. We've used that joke a few times.
Oh, yeah, but I mean, come on. It's literally anyone who knows Bioshock knows. And if you
Absolutely.
don't, go play it.
Exactly. Well, today we're revisiting the career of Hideki Kamiya, and we've explored the career of Kamiya a few times, which we're going to cover as we go through this. Kamiya was introduced to video games as a young child by his neighbor, and this would have been the early 80s, roughly. And in the early 80s, he recalled playing on a system called an Epic Cassette Vision. His favorite part about gaming as a child, he recalls, was the sounds that it made. He was attracted to them. During his junior school years, the Nintendo Famicom came out, which we did an episode on recently. So you want to learn all about the Famicom, go check it out. And Kamiya was able to get his hands on one. The first game that he recalls purchasing for it was a puzzle platformer that was published in 1983 called Nuts and Milk. Yeah, I know. It's all I know. I know. It's one of those names that in the modern age you can't help but giggle at it. So, in high school, he bought himself an NEC PC 8801 because he wanted to study programming, but instead he ended up playing video games on it every day, which is incredibly relatable.
Yeah, I can relate to that too.
Kamiya has said in interviews that some of the games from this period are among his most influential to his design career. For instance, he cites his favorite action game as the original Castlevania, which makes a whole lot of sense in the context of today's episode.
Yeah, it does.
Yeah, it does. It really does. Other games that he feels that he was most inspired by include Legend of Zelda: A Link to the Past, Gradius. He also enjoyed games like Space Harrier, Cybernator, Punch Out, Wonder Boy in Monsterland, Snatcher, Sorcerian, and Star Cruiser. He has actually cited Strider as a major influence for Devil May Cry, so throw that in the mix. And it was here somewhere in this time period. These are all Nintendo and Link to the Past is Super Nintendo. So we're in the Nintendo and Famicom and Super Famicom era. Somewhere in this era is when Kamiya read an interview in Family Computer Magazine, Famicom, one that featured game creators Shigeru Miyamoto and Masanobu Endo. Both fantastic people that we have done entire episodes on. Absolute entire episodes on.
Multiple entire episodes.
Multiple entire episodes on for sure. So, that interview that he read in that magazine inspired him to become a video game developer. After that, he decided that's what he wanted to do. So, he went to college to achieve that end. And afterwards, he began to apply to jobs at various game developers. At first, he didn't have much luck. Sega turned him down. He got a response back from Namco. Namco said, "Sure, we'll take you, but we want to hire you on as an artist." Kamiya said, "Thanks, but no thanks. I'd rather be a game designer." So he held out and kept trying, and eventually he was successful. In 1994, he was hired into Capcom and brought into the team at Capcom as a system planner, specifically for the original Resident Evil. Now, we've covered this story before, the story of Resident Evil, both 1 and 2. Kamiya is part of both stories. But we'll kind of briefly go through it again. Kamiya was a system planner for Resident Evil 1, and it was very successful. He was very good at his job. So he was promoted to director for the second Resident Evil. And he's pretty much the guy that made Resident Evil 2 happen. Now, if you want to kind of cover everything and learn the ins and outs of the story, go back to episode 125. But the short of it for today is that there were people involved in the game, higher ups involved in the game, who went into it with the mentality that Resident Evil 2 was going to be the end of the series. And they had a story planned, and they had gameplay planned, and it was all designed to that end. Aside from that, the original design of Resident Evil 2 was very close to Resident Evil 1, and as we know, it's not quite, it's bigger and better. So the team got to work on all of this, with their producer, and Kamiya was the director, and they started to put together the game in this vision. And they got through, by all accounts, 60 to 80% of the game. And they sat down before they started to play it, and they realized that it just wasn't very good. It wasn't a very good game. There wasn't a great story. The assets that they created were they were Resident Evil 1 assets. The quality was technologically in the past. And this was 3 months before the original release date of Resident Evil 2. So 3 months, looking at the end line with 3 months to go, 60, 70, 80% done, the team sits down and they say, this is not what we want. This is not how we want to represent ourselves. This is trash. If we release this to the world, people are not going to like it. So they decide to scrap it. That version of the game still exists in gameplay, not really gameplay demos, video and stuff like that. We kind of historically call it Resident Evil 1.5 now. And they sat down to completely redesign the game, which was going to be Resident Evil 2. Now, they did re-release Resident Evil 1 in a director's cut. They released it with a demo of Resident Evil 2 after they kind of redid it, made some tweaks to it. And that was like a mea culpa to Resident Evil fans, like, hey, we're sorry that we're going to miss the release date significantly. So here's a teaser. Please don't hate us. And the team went back to work on Resident Evil 2. Um, the team sat down to redesign the game. A script writer was brought in. Um, they went to someone else with a higher vision, higher up at the company, who, instead of feeling that Resident Evil 2 was supposed to be the end of the line, felt that maybe Resident Evil should be a series, kind of similar to the way at the time they saw it as either James Bond or Gundam. So they kind of looked at creating a Resident Evil universe. And so they made all these changes as part of the redesign. And as that was happening, Kamiya was also implementing some really fundamental changes to Resident Evil itself. One of which specifically was giving the game a more Hollywood like presentation. And this all, as we know now, really laid the groundwork for the Resident Evil series that we know and love today. Hey, Rob, speaking of laying the groundwork, do you know who has a fantastic set of tools for anyone looking to lay the groundwork for their own new podcast?
I do, actually, Dave. I mean, we talk about them almost every week, don't we?
Yeah, we do. So, are you a listener looking to start a podcast, or are you maybe in the market uh, as a podcast producers to make the podcast of podcasting easier? Podcast? I just created a new phrase. We're leaving that in there. The process of making a podcast is now a podcast.
All right.
If you're looking to make podcasting easier, take a look at the all-in-one suite of podcasting tools offered by our friends at Zencaster.
With Zencaster, it's super easy to record your podcast. Everyone logs in using a web browser, and you start recording high quality podcasts right away. You can record up to 4K video with your guests, and with multi layered backups, you always have the highest quality recordings, even if your connection's unstable.
And with Zencaster, you never have to worry about what you sound like. Zencaster's post-production process makes you sound buttery smooth. It automatically removes all those ahs, gets rid of all those awkward pauses in conversation. You can set the right podcast loudness. You can reduce background noise, all with a single click of a button.
And if the thought of podcasting overwhelms you because you think you need tons of different tools and services, relax. With Zencaster, those days are over. With their all in one podcasting platform, you can create your podcast, edit it, and distribute it to Spotify, Apple, and other major destinations, all from one place.
So if you'd like to start your own podcast, or again, maybe you're just looking to take your current podcasting to the next level, we've got a deal for you. Go to zencaster.com/pricing and use our offer code MemoryCardLane, and you can get 30% off the first month of any Zencaster paid platform.
Sign up for Zencaster today, and you can experience the same ease in producing your own high quality podcast as we do each week. Go out and share your wild stories and outrageous adventures with the world.
Now, as we know, Resident Evil was an absolute hit, arguably the best in the series, I would say. People are gonna
Careful there,
fight.
Dave.
People might fight me on that.
Yeah, careful there, Dave.
Which one has been better than Resident Evil 2?
I mean, it really depends on your outlook.
Mm-hmm.
It's a very debatable question. Like some could say that
Mm-hmm.
3 was better, some could say 4, some could say
Oh, there
Biohazard or
is nobody.
Village.
There is nobody on the planet who will say that 3 is better.
Okay, so I'm
4,
gonna argue there are some
maybe.
people, but 4 or 5, Biohazard, Village. I mean, come on. If
Okay.
it depends on what your style is. If you're more into the horror side of things, then Biohazard and Village. But if you're more into the zombie killing and the straight up action, then yeah, okay, yeah, 2's a pretty damn good one. But again, we're not here to talk about that. So continue on.
Maybe we are here to talk about that.
Oh, maybe we are.
Maybe. Either way, Resident Evil 2 was an absolute hit, both critically and commercially. It's still seen as one of the highest rated games for the PlayStation 2, so people loved it. Or PlayStation 1, rather. Ooh, I'm gonna get burned on that one. And in the aftermath of RE2, Capcom started working on multiple Resident Evil projects because, money. They left Kamiya at the helm of the project that they had considered to be the next main installment in the series. They were going to stick with him. He was going to make the next big one, and which was, of course, going to be Resident Evil 3. Now, the plan for Resident Evil 3 was that the game was going to take place on a cruise ship, and you would be Hunk, an Umbrella agent who was working to bring back a sample of the G virus. Of course, we know now that there is no Resident Evil that takes place on a cruise ship. So that never happened.
Um, wasn't
There a
I mean,
cruise ship in Village? Or not
yeah.
Village. There was a didn't you went onto a freighter at the end of
It was,
Biohazard.
you're right. It was a freighter, not a
Yeah,
cruise ship. All
it
right,
was a
fair
freighter.
enough. Fair enough.
Yeah. It was a freighter. Yeah. Okay. Boat's a boat.
Oh, whoa! I wouldn't go that far. You're really trying to get
I
flamed this
am.
episode,
I,
Dave.
I am for sure. Whew. So what happened was in the midst of development on RE3, Sony announced the PlayStation 2. And there was absolutely no way that Kamiya's team was going to be able to finish the project before the release of the PlayStation 2. So they decided they were just going to scrap everything that they had and cancel the project altogether. With that being said, there is a Resident Evil 3. So what happened was one of the other Resident Evil projects, one that was intended to be a spin-off of the main series, was further along. It was promoted to the helm. It was reworked, for it wasn't reworked because Resident Evil 3 is the last of the PlayStation games, but it was further along. So it was promoted, tweaked to be the next main installment in the series. So it was released as Resident Evil 3. So, fun little fact, Resident Evil 3 was intended to be a spin off originally. I think they wanted to call it like Resident Evil Nemesis, if I'm not mistaken, but don't hold me to that.
Yeah, that would make sense.
Mm-hmm. So, in the meantime, after canceling Kamiya's version of 3 and passing that torch onto that team, Kamiya and his team proper were asked to work on the next installment of the Resident Evil series, which was going to be Resident Evil 4, right? So he brought in his scriptwriter from Resident Evil 2, who was Noboru Sujimura. Sujimura is the guy who helped rewrite the script and kind of take Resident Evil 2 from being the end to being more of a universe. And Kamiya had the idea to change up the Resident Evil franchise once again, because that's what Kamiya does over and over and over, is he likes to make new things. This time, his idea was that he was going to make a quote unquote very cool and stylized action adventure game. The story idea that they came up with involved the unraveling of a mystery surrounding the body of a man named Tony, who was going to be the protagonist. And Tony was an invincible man who had more skills and a higher intellect than a normal person had. And it was said that he gained these superhuman abilities through biotechnology, and then the story played out as they learned more about that. My guess is it was going to be an umbrella thing, and said biotechnology probably led to a bad result, right?
Most likely, that would make
Because
sense.
that's what Umbrella and Resident Evil does, is they make things that they shouldn't supposed to.
Shouldn't supposed to.
It's a double negative. I'm gonna roll with it. I'm
All
talking out
right,
of my butt a lot today, apparently, trying to tick a lot of people off. Might as well add the grammar people to the mix.
you got that right.
As they began to work on the game, Kamiya felt that the playable character didn't look brave or heroic enough when battling from the fixed angles that Resident Evil players were accustomed to. So early on, he made a decision that he wanted to get rid of the fixed camera angles that Resident Evil was famous for and switch over to a dynamic camera system instead. Now, whenever you switch to a dynamic camera system, there is a lot more design that's involved with it, right? Because you go from being able to control what the player sees to just putting the player in an environment and not being able to control that so they can see everything. So you essentially go from only having to design what's on camera to having to design an entire room or environment per se, right? So there was a lot more work and consideration that needed to be given to the level design now, and they had to resolve that. So the team took a trip to Europe. They spent 11 days in the United Kingdom and Spain taking photographs of things like Gothic statues, bricks, stone pavements, all sorts of interesting things that they could use as textures in their project. And they began to press further as the team found themselves deeper and deeper down this rabbit hole, trying to find a place for there to be quote unquote cool in the Resident Evil universe. The producer of the Resident Evil series, Shinji Mikami, felt that they were straying too far from survival horror. And that's what Resident Evil was known for, their survival horror roots. And as they got further into this project, the decision was made that they should probably separate it from the Resident Evil universe altogether because it was a good project. What they had in place was good and promising, but it didn't feel or play like a Resident Evil game. So, Resident Evil 4 was assigned to a different team, and we know what that looks like now. That's when, funny enough, that's when the series took its turn into action adventure. Resident Evil 4 is the village and the castle the first time around, right?
Right.
Um, but this team that we now know as Team Little Devils took what they already had and they decided to roll with it. But of course, it was no longer a Resident Evil game. So the first thing the team had to do was they had to rewrite the story. Now it was decided that the game was going to take place in a world full of demons, not a world full of zombies. Sujimura and Kamiya took inspiration from the Italian epic poem, the Italian epic poem Divine Comedy by Dante Alighieri. Have you ever had to read the Divine Comedy?
I have not. No.
You've never had to read the Divine Comedy. You've gotten through all of school, college, everything without ever having to read the Divine Comedy. I'm not criticizing. I'm actually envious of you at this point. So,
I don't know what to tell you, Dave.
it's one of the greatest works of Western literature.
I mean, I believe it. I just never had to for school.
So basically, for those of you that don't know, to kind of place to it, the Divine Comedy is a poem. It's an epic poem that discusses the state of the soul after death, and basically presents an image of divine justice that is given out as like your like punishment or reward, right? So how did you conduct yourself in life? If you did good, here's your reward when you pass away. And if you didn't, here is the punishment, right, when you pass away. And Dante goes through all the basic circles of heaven and hell and purgatory, and he sees how this plays out in different ways. Um, Rejecting sin, which is inferno, and then there's purgatory, which is a Christian life because we live in purgatory, and then there's like these souls ascent to God, which is paradise. So, right, inferno, purgatorio, paradiso. Yes, sorry, drawing on my literature background for funsies right now.
Yeah,
And
I'm about it. It's important.
Rob, in the poem, I'm doing
Mm-hmm.
this for you.
Yeah.
He has three guides. He has Virgil,
Mm-hmm.
he has Beatrice, and
Mm-hmm.
he has Saint Bernard.
Mm. Only one of those means anything to me.
I know, but Virgil ended up in the Devil May Cry series, so
Yeah.
yeah, he did. So obviously, for those of you that know Devil May Cry, Dante, as in Dante Alighieri, Dante became the name of the protagonist. Dante is the name of the main character from the Devil May Cry series, right? Right. What's is it? What is his name? Just Dante? Does he have a last name?
Oh man, that's a tough one. I don't know that canonically.
I
I
don't think
know their father is Sparta, and their mother is Ava, but I don't know that
that is
did Ava.
that, that is all true, but you are correct. He
I don't
does
know
not.
that a last name was ever.
That is correct. He does not. Very good.
Yeah, I don't think. Yeah, okay, good to know.
Dante's personality was based on the main character from a manga. I got that right.
You did.
I looked it up before we recorded
Ah,
because I
smart.
always get it wrong. For whatever reason, I always get manga wrong. But I got it right because it did my job correctly for once.
Nice.
So Dante's personality was based on a main character from a manga that was published between 1978 and 1984 called Cobra. Cobra was a illustrated series that was originally in a Shonen Weekly. We've talked about a lot of mangas that started out on Jump Weekly, and it was illustrated by Boichi Terasaw. And he tells the story of Cobra. Cobra surgically alters his face, erases his own memory to hide from foes. Basically, he lives an adventurous life until his enemies begin to hunt him down. And the illustrated series is about all this stuff where he tries to get away from his enemies and live a normal life. But Cobra is where Dante's personality comes from. Kamiya's version, whichever you want to say, of Dante, he perceived him as a stylish non-smoker. He wears a long coat because it was trendy at the time. Are long coats still trendy now? I don't know what the cool kids are into. Are long coats trendy?
I'm not cool.
I know that short skirts and long jackets are cool to me still. So,
True. Yeah, I'll give you that.
okay. Red was chosen to accent Dante because in Japanese illustrations culture, however you want to look at it, it's the traditional color for heroic figures. So Dante is a very stylish, cool, heroic figure. Kamiya said in an interview that Dante was going to be someone that you'd want to go out drinking with. Someone who wasn't necessarily a show off, but one that would instead pull off some ridiculously mischievous joke to win everyone over. I think he's a
Makes
show
sense.
off. Isn't he a show off?
A little bit. Yeah, I'd say so.
I feel like he's a big show off, actually.
I mean, yeah, he can show off once or twice in the series.
He's a cocky mofo.
That's putting it nicely.
aside from this, most of the characters in the project remained identical to the original scenario that they wrote, that Sujimura wrote when he conceived the idea as Resident Evil 4. They just kind of tweaked them a little and renamed them to fit the Devil May Cry theme. But largely, it stayed similar, which is kind of interesting to think about. That this could have been a Resident Evil had they not done that, right?
Yeah, that's a good point.
In the middle of November 2000, I think it was November 15th, remember correctly, Capcom revealed that the team was now working on a game called Devil May Cry. And at this point, the team still kind of thought that they were working on a game that was similar to Resident Evil, just with a different story, right? A different story. They took the camera angle out, but they were still really focused on this survival horror, like open world ish type concept. Not that Resident Evil is an open world, but it's an open gameplay style compared to Devil May Cry. Is that fair?
I would say so.
There's a reason why this playstyle is different because as they got late into the development process, they made some key changes. One thing, as the story goes, is that during this development process, there was another team at Capcom working on a game called Animusha Warlords. And the team working on Warlords stumbled across a bug that allowed them to keep their enemies in the air by slashing them repeatedly. And Kamiya saw this and really liked the concept, and that inspired Kamiya and this team, Team Little Devils, to incorporate what is now one of the more notable gameplay features of the Devil May Cry series, which is the inclusion of juggling. You can juggle by either sword or gunfire, right?
Yes, you can.
And that's a big part of how you do combat in this series, is it not?
Yeah, comboing and juggling is a huge thing.
And that was literally they got the idea from a bug in another game.
That's fantastic.
And as they kind of thought about that and they worked with the dynamic camera style and being cool and everything, they kind of had to redesign the game from the ground up around Dante's acrobatics and combat abilities, including this ability to juggle. So, with that being said, Devil May Cry is not open ended. It's a very mission based game, correct? Correct. It's got a mission based structure.
Yes,
You play a
you do
level,
missions.
yeah, you play a level or a mission, and at the end, it grades you on the mission, if I remember correctly. So
Yep,
that's okay.
you got it right.
All right. I have not played a lot of Devil May Cry, listeners, so I'm leaning on Rob a lot for the know how. Um, they didn't decide to change to a more mission based structure until late in the development process, and about then is when they like ramped up the difficulty because they Kamiya said that they wanted the game to be kind of punishing to casual gamers.
Nice. Makes sense.
So they wrapped up development on Devil May Cry and released it to the world on August 23rd, 2001. So Rob, tell me about what you remember. Like was this a game that you tripped on when it first came out for starters?
Oh god, I don't really remember how I came across it.
But you do know you played the first one. Like you didn't start at 2 and then have to go back to 1.
Oh, I definitely started on one.
Definitely started at 1.
Yeah.
But it wasn't a game that you were like super hyped for or anything. Like you just found it one day and got and essentially fell in love with it.
Yeah, I like I said, I couldn't tell you how I found the game, but I know that once I started playing it, it was just addicting and something that I find myself playing over and over again.
What do you like
Even
about
now,
it?
I mean, the story is just fantastic. Dante's character, being the quirky, cocky, funny one-liner he is just a lot of fun to play. And the combat is a different style than most other games that I play. I'm not obviously very good at combo games, and having grown up with a brother who was that kicked my ass a lot, it was nice finding a combo game that I could actually win uh, and do well in. Um, and it's also cool the whole demon hunter thing, and I mean I've always been into that kind of stuff. Like I mean, Supernatural is one of my favorite shows of all time.
Right.
So getting to play as a demon hunter and then finding out these son of Sparta, part demon, it's like holy shit, like this is cool. You're part demon hunting other demons. Like what the hell? It's awesome. Um, yeah, the whole series again, it's a fantastic story throughout. The enemies in the game are extremely unique. Um, I think one of the most memorable things for me from the original were the marionettes.
Okay.
Uh,
Okay.
so it's one thing that I always have remembered, and every time I think the original Devil May Cry, it is the marionettes. Between that and I believe they were called Sin Scissors or something like that. Um, but you had the marionettes that were literally just marionettes that were possessed, and then you had the Sin Scissors that were just like a ghost that held giant scissors, and it was just those two villains from that game were so memorable to me because I remember just being terrified the first time I played the game, being like, "This is fucking scary," and like I was scared of marionettes and puppets for the longest time because of that. But it was like still badass to see them in game and like the way they moved and fought. It was so cool. I'm this little kid playing through this and just getting to beat them up. It was really cool.
I'm trying to see because I never got into Devil May Cry, and I never got into Devil May Cry. I never really got into any of them, but I'm trying to think about what would have come out like around this time roughly. Like what else were we playing in 2001 that would have had my attention instead? Because this came out in what, August, and that would have been a month after Final Fantasy X came out.
Uh,
Also,
that makes sense.
yeah, I was probably hooked on Final Fantasy X, and then Metal Gear Solid 2 would have been November, so this would have been in between the two, and it would have probably just got like disappeared. Grand Theft Auto 3 was October. The original Halo was November of 2001. Um, so this would have just gotten eaten up by a lot of that type of stuff. Super Smash Brothers Melee was November.
Yeah, you weren't playing that. Let's be honest.
I think I played it.
Not like it wouldn't have been enough to take you away from it, though.
Yeah, it was Final Fantasy for sure. I played every time a Final Fantasy game came out back then. I was hooked. Heck, Final Fantasy X, I would have played and we would have recorded it while we played. I probably have VCR copies of the story of Final Fantasy X somewhere in this house because I would record on a VCR tape every cutscene to a Final Fantasy game, and then so I could go back and watch them as movies, which is so funny to think and talk about now because we do that on YouTube willy nilly. And I was doing that through the use of a VCR back in 2000.
Oh, I straight up remember that I had recorded my playthrough of Super Mario Sunshine on a VCR.
For sure. That's funny. That is so funny. Oh man, Devil May Cry 1 was definitely not the end of the series, was it?
No, no, surprisingly not. They made a few more, maybe one or two. Maybe like 4 or 5 or 6 or a few more. Who
I mean,
knows?
the first Devil May Cry did pretty well. It sold something like a million plus copies. It earned 40 plus $50 million, somewhere in that ballpark. It rates, I mean, the PS2 version Metacritic score is a 94 out of 100. It People look like critically it was amazing, and people ate it up like nobody's business. There's a Game Informer interview that said it makes Resident Evil look like a slow zombie game, which comparatively it's the truth, right? Like that was what was so cool about Devil May Cry. It was so fast, it was so fluid compared to what else was out there at the time.
Yeah, no, most definitely.
And I think it stayed, if I'm not mistaken, I think it stayed king of that concept until God of War came out in 2005, if I remember correctly. And then people kind of moved on to that, which took that the helm and just did the same thing in a different environment with another great story. A couple years later, in 2003, they released Devil May Cry 2. Devil May Cry 3 came out in 2005, same year as God of War that I was just talking about. Devil May Cry 4 came out in 2008. Have you played all of them, by the way?
I pretty confident I have.
You're pretty
Yeah.
confident you have, yeah. In 2013, they decided to reboot the series, and we don't talk about. No, we're going to talk about it. We did a whole episode on it. They tried to reboot the series with DMC Devil May Cry. We covered it. It's still the only Devil May Cry game I've ever played in my entire life. which is not saying much. It's very sad. We should change that, Rob.
You should.
Yeah, because it's the worst of them.
And then you got to decide if you want to play them in chronological order or release order.
Have they ever remade any of them like the originals? Do I have to go back and play the original Devil May Cry as Devil May Cry? Do you know?
You mean like a remaster?
Yeah, like a remaster. Have they done anything like that?
Yeah, they definitely have. They did the on Steam the HD edition.
That's correct. There is an HD collection. You are 100% right about that.
Yeah, which will
Um,
contain 1, 2, and 3. But I mean, 4 or 5 are new enough that they probably don't need it.
so I played DMC. We covered it, talked about it. Episode 20, before we were straight up historical podcast, we were more about topical. And I think the topic that we talked about, I remember, was would this game do well and survive like today? Because topically it's kind of different. It's different. So that's what we talked about back then. People decided they weren't very fond of the reboot, so they ditched that concept. And in 2019, the series went back to its roots with Devil May Cry 5. The fifth one, a good one.
5, yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. To date, between all of these games and a few of the collections that we just noted, there have been over 31 million copies of Devil May Cry games sold wide. So it is a major franchise for Capcom. And in case you were wondering, it has not stopped at video games. There were what are called light novels written to introduce players to stories of various games, like there's one for Devil May Cry 1 and 2. There's a prequel written for Devil May Cry 5 called Before the Nightmare. There is a 3-part Devil May Cry 3 manga, so that exists. In 2007, there was a 12-episode animated series literally called Devil May Cry the Animated Series. It takes place between Devil May Cry 1 and 2. And supposedly, we're supposed to get a Devil May Cry TV series on Netflix sometime this year. It's got a 2024 release date, but nothing beyond that. So who knows if that's still the case.
Hmm. I did not know. That would be pretty dope.
somewhere
Hopefully.
somewhere around the time that the reboot happened, someone purchased the film rights to Devil May Cry, intending to do a film version akin to DMC Devil May Cry. But that never happened, probably because DMC Devil May Cry never happened. I mean, people hated it. So my guess is when that game went up in flames, the film project went up in flames too, and no one has repurchased the rights or decided to do anything with the rights. And Rob, you should know that there have also been stage adaptations of Devil May Cry. There was one called Sengoku Basara versus Devil May Cry, in which devil characters from Devil May Cry have been sent back in time by a devil, and they meet the characters from the Sengoku series. And there was also a 13-day run of Devil May Cry the Live Hacker, which was a musical that ran in Tokyo in 2019.
Interesting.
So somewhere there was a Devil May Cry musical. And aside from that, the characters from the Devil May Cry series have become a staple in most of Capcom's lineups. They are regulars in the Marvel vs. Capcom series, for instance, and they have made cameos in other Capcom titles, Bayonetta, for instance, I think. So, but at the moment, there are no newly announced games in the series, so who knows what the future of Devil May Cry brings. Hideki Kamiya, though, he wasn't done yet. In episode 96, we looked back at the next part of his career, which was when he formed Clover Studio and he developed Beautiful Joe. So if you'd like to learn about Kamiya, the Capcom 5, and Beautiful Joe, go check out episode 96. And then after the Clover period, he ended up joining Platinum Games and worked on the Bayonetta series, which is very similar to. Have you ever played Bayonetta?
I have not, no.
I would. Yeah. He made the Bayonetta series, and now he's on to something new, bigger and better pastures. So we'll see what it is. It's something called Project GG. Not a lot of information on it. Hopefully he sticks to what he does best, because Beautiful Joe was not it. But Devil May Cry and Bayonetta have all been great series, fan favorites, you know. So Devil May Cry has a long storied history. Hopefully that continues, but at the moment we don't know. We got 5 games. Actually, there was a mobile game released this year called Devil May Cry Peak of Combat. There was a mobile game released this year. Apparently, it was in beta back in 2020, and it got its release this year, so it's got a 2024 release date. So there technically is a new addition to the universe, but there hasn't been an actual release since they released a special edition of Devil May Cry 5 in 2020. That's the last time we've gotten a release in Devil May Cry, right?
Right.
And Rob can't wait for a new one.
Got that right. Now
So,
I want to replay the originals.
yeah, one of these days I should. Like I keep saying, I should go back and play through Dark Souls too. So it's funny how our interest in video games is. I mean, I wouldn't say it's wildly different, but it is very different because you like these action adventure games, and they have never been my favorite. That's not true. I've played every single God of War and then some. So I guess I do dabble in the series, but for whatever reason, Devil May Cry and the Souls like have never stuck with me.
When the
Who knows?
game requires skill, Dave is not into it.
No, not this type of skill. That's very true. I do not have the reflexes, and it frustrates me. So, well, we referenced a lot of other episodes here. Like I said, episode 96 in Beautiful Joe, and you can go and check out Kamiya and the Resident Evil 2 episode, the Resident Evil 1 episode. Of course, in the beginning, we talked about how we've done episodes on Bioshock and GoldenEye 007 for our golden anniversary. Of course, we are here at our quincentennial episode, and I didn't even know it. No, quadtennial. What's a four? It doesn't matter. It's quad. Quin's 5, so quad. Whatever. It's 4 years. Congratulations, Rob. We made it 4 years. Woo! So that means that there's 4 whole years of podcasts for you to go back and check out on. There's some in the beginning when we were a more skit based, and then we were topical based, and then we slowly became this historical, informational podcast that you know and love today. But still, the old stuff is kind of fun to go back on because you can go and see how we went from being not good to decent podcasters. I'm not going to say we're great podcasters, but we were really bad in the beginning. Don't go back to the beginning. And
Yeah,
of
don't do
course,
that.
if you want to check out any of those old episodes, you can do so by going to our website, which is www.memorycardlane.com. Rob, what else can people do on our website?
Well, you can find a calendar of our upcoming episodes, not just the previous ones. You can find a link to our Patreon where you can help support us and get access to ad-free and unedited versions of all of our episodes. You can find a link to our Discord where you can come talk games or whatever else with Dave and I. And you can find links to our social medias. I am on several platforms as Rob_O_Raptor, and Dave.
I can be found on various platforms as David is Wrong. Each week, ladies and gentlemen, we tell you one story relevant to the current week in gaming history. I find a topic that's relevant to the publication week and I roll with it. I sit down, I do research, and when I sit down to do research, my whole goal is to learn something new because the way I see it, if I'm learning something new, I have a chance to teach someone else so they learn something new. In celebration of this cycle of learning, teaching that I love so much, we like to go and talk roundtable about our biggest takeaways for each week. So, Rob, what did you learn today?
Well, for the first time, there wasn't a ton that I learned about. I happen to have known a lot of this. It's something that I have looked into. I had known about the Resident Evil being named after the Divine Comedy, a lot of that stuff. But the one thing that I didn't know that I think is fantastic is that it turns out juggling was a glitch from another game.
That is
That's
pretty cool.
that's like I always thought that was intentional and something they had made for this and designed for the series and was like, oh yeah, it's a cool bass battle style. I love it, but to know that it was actually an accident, which I mean we've seen that before. I can't think of what the other instances were, but we've seen where something. Oh, it was Space Invaders, if I remember correctly, where it wasn't intentional that it sped up, but they determined that they
Yeah.
liked it so much that they added it to the game. And I think that's really cool that here's another instance of a glitch from something that they're like, hey, that's actually pretty cool. Let's add it to the game.
Yeah,
So
that was absolutely it. When there were less enemies on screen, the processor would make the enemies move faster. And instead of programming it in a way to slow them down, they said, "Oh, it's not a bug; it's a feature."
exactly. See, I listen
You
sometimes.
do. That's a good. That's a. I'm proud of that reference. That one makes me feel good about what I do every week. So that's a good
Uh,
reference.
so that's it for me, but still fantastic to get to hear the story and for you to learn all of the things that I have learned and to hear them. So this is one that I probably could have taken lead on, but hey, it's great hearing you and getting to see you learn about the things that I enjoy. So
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
that's it for me. What about yourself, Dave?
I'm gonna go with the fact that there is a Devil May Cry musical out in the world.
I mean, that is fantastic.
Well, I mean, it's like you said. There's a lot of this that we've touched. Honestly, we've touched on a lot of this already, right? We've talked about Kamiya in the Resident Evil episodes. We talked about Kamiya in the Beautiful Joe episodes, and we've touched on bits and pieces of this. And we're going to start seeing this more and more and more. We did it again last week with the Rational Games and Looking Glass Studios because we had talked about them in other games too. Is we're starting to fill in these gaps in all these stories because we're now on to the second, or in this case the third game that we've covered by this designer. Every year we kind of seem to do one by specific designers, and now we're on to another here, so we're filling in gaps. So it's fun. We talked about Resident Evil already, and we talked about Resident Evil on the cruise ship during the first episode when we had your friend on who was the Resident Evil nerd. Who did we have on for the first one?
First, what?
Resident Evil, who schooled
Um,
me on Resident Evil. Which one of your friends schooled me on Resident Evil?
the same one who could school you and me
Ace
on Devil May
Attorney.
Cry.
Really?
No,
He could
nope.
do it here too?
Oh, absolutely. That man, he has played through all of the modes. I'm pretty sure even Dante Must Die, he's beaten them all on. Which, for those that don't know, is basically a one hit death.
I mean,
I can say he's definitely done Heaven and Hell, but it would be my friend Razor Zenkai, aka Colby.
yeah, Kobe. Yeah, and that makes a lot of sense considering that that series Resident Evil became Devil May Cry in a way, so.
Yeah, oh yeah. No, like having known that, it makes so much sense how he's into both of them. But yeah, 100%. Even this is my favorite game series, but he would put my like. I promise you, he would outplay me 9-10 to 1. He could tell you probably every damn thing about every single game. I don't have that kind of memory. I just know I loved the shit out of them and played them a ton.
Yeah,
But
he's a lore guy. He'll tell you the histories of every character down to a T.
oh yeah, yeah, it's awesome. I love that guy. He's fantastic.
Yeah, so we've touched on bits of this story, and we've talked about this before. So it was kind of fun getting the nitty gritty, and talking about like the bug, like you said, and I didn't know that there were novels or a musical, so that was fun to get into. And it's kind of fun filling in the gaps and bringing it all together. That's for sure. All right. Well, that'll do it for our story on Devil May Cry. Before I take it into next week, Rob, is there anything you'd like to add to today's episode?
As always, I want to take one quick moment to say thank you so much to all of you for listening. We hope you enjoy getting to learn about the games that we've played, sometimes a lot, sometimes not at all. Uh, which, I mean, then we wouldn't have played them, but you know what I'm saying here. Thank you for listening. It means the world to us, and we hope you get to enjoy learning about all of these games with us.
All right, fellow demon slayers, that'll wrap up our deep dive into the creation of Devil May Cry and the legacy of this iconic action series. We hope that you've enjoyed this stylus and fast paced trip down memory card lane, a little bit of nostalgia, learn something new about how this game redefined the hack and slash genre and set a new standard for action games everywhere. Next week, though, we're stepping away from demonic battles and stylish combat to explore literally the pioneer of handheld gaming. Get ready to journey back to the early 1980s as we take a look at Nintendo's Game and Watch line. We'll dive into how these simple yet groundbreaking devices paved the way for portable gaming and influenced an entire generation of gamers. So if you thought that Devil May Cry was iconic, Wait until you hear about the little devices that started handheld gaming. Join us as we
Mhm.
press start on the legacy of Game and Watch for next week's trip down memory card lane. Do the thing.
Do ba 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 dum ba ba do do ba ba dum ba ba ba.